Welcome to my review of Legend of Hero Tonma for the arcade. And this is by Irem, which, are most known for their shooters like R-Type. Basically, R-Type is one of the biggest games from them, but of course they had Hammer and Harry, which was a great platform action game. Ninja Spirit, which is almost like a shooter with a ninja, because you have such a high jump height. It's almost like driving a spaceship around the screen. But with all that said, this is a great platform action game, and it was also ported over to the TurboGrafx 16, maybe a few other platforms, but the TurboGrafx 16 port is actually really, really good. It's in some ways more of a fun version because it's not nearly as difficult as this version. This version is quite difficult, as with a lot of old arcade games. Now, it's kind of unbalanced difficulty. Some parts are pretty damn easy if you're good at action games, while other parts, even for someone like myself that's pretty conditioned to these kind of games, there's one section that took me a while. It probably took me over an hour. I mean, not a super long time, but back when I played it years ago, I think that section probably took me several hours to beat. I believe I beat the entire game this time in under 3 hours, which is much faster than I expected, but I've definitely improved since then in overall skill. The last time I beat this was the US version in 2014. So the reason I played through the Japanese version, which is the footage you're seeing here, the reason I went with the Japanese version is just to add an extra game on my kill list. I had not beaten that Japanese region version. Usually I don't do different regional versions of games to add to my kill list just because I think it's kind of cheap. But it gave me a little bit of an incentive to do it in this case because I figured I could get footage for the channel, make a review, make a tutorial, which I'll link the tutorial in the description as well. But yeah, this is quite a classic action game. I think this is quite a good game. I really liked this when I discovered it on MAME, arcade emulation. And it was tough because, at the time I had very little experience with beating console-style arcade games, which are arcade games with penalties for death, like sending you back to a checkpoint. I always label them as console-style arcade games in my games beaten list or my kill list. But yeah, as with a lot of old arcade games, it's very specific in your movement. You really have to almost memorize each movement and which enemies you're going to take out in which order. And it's basically pathfinding. It's that pathfinding trial and error. So, those that play arcade games from this era will know exactly what kind of game this is. But it's a good one. It's definitely a fun game. In my tutorial, I will cover a lot of exploits I found for the bosses. Like I found perfect positioning exploits, such as with this tree. If you place your foot in this area right here with these power-ups, you don't have to do anything on this boss. Just stand there and keep firing. So there's definitely a lot of exploits and things that I'll detail in the tutorial that, if you're looking to beat the game, it'll probably cut off hours off of your time. So it may be a entertaining watch before you play the game. So basically, the game is very straightforward. I mean, there is a few areas where you have to collect keys to open these doors, but the keys are never too far away from the doors you have to open. So it's not completely linear in a straight line, but when it does, the few levels that are a little bit non-linear are very straightforward for the most part. I got lost, very little when I replayed the game because I completely forgot how to play it as far as the level layouts and shit, but it didn't take too long to figure out. There's really not too many places you can go. I mean, the main area is that if you do go off somewhere, you may die initially because the game is challenging. But you can bounce off of enemies if you hold the jump button down and land directly on top of them, or you can just shoot them with the various, gun power-ups. There's a few different types of guns. And there's one part, it took me a little while to figure out again that I had to bounce off of this guy to get over that barrier. But that's about, that's the most puzzle-related thing in the entire game. This is mainly an action game, so if you want to consider that a puzzle element, that's about as close as it gets. And the key parts where you have to open the doors, but like I said, very, very simple navigation. There's no bullshit mazes or anything like that in the game, which is appreciated. So yeah, you have your boss fights at the end of each stage. There's only maybe a few stages, really not that many. This is the hardest stage in the game you're seeing here, and I'll show this in its entirety so you can get an idea of what the hardest section of the game looks like. It is one-hit deaths, and there is no checkpoint on this stage, so it has to be done in one clean little playthrough. Most of the stages have halfway checkpoints, but this one does not. But the good news, after you beat this stage, including the boss, you do get a final boss, which is its own separate stage. So The final boss does give you a checkpoint on it. There is no sneaky tricks like sending you back to the beginning of the game, or suddenly you don't have any more continues left like some arcade games do near the end of the game. Shinobi for arcade did that, where you get to the end, once you get to the last stage, you lose a continue, that's it. It'll blindside you completely if you don't know that the game is going to pull that sneaky shit. But this game is very, very fair in that regard, and you just have to learn it. It's very learnable. But it gets very challenging, I think, even for a lot of players that have played through these kind of games. I think this will be a challenging one. It's very specific, the pathing, and the paths you have to figure out to get to the stage can be quite specific, especially on this stage. This is where they really test you on this stage. Most of the boss fights are pretty damn simple, really. I mean, this is a tough one, even though it doesn't look that bad. This one was tough for me years ago, very, very hard for me. Even with practicing with save states, I had a lot of trouble back then. But this time I was able to kind of react to it and just move with the flow of the bullets, and it really didn't take me long to beat this time, so I must have improved a lot. Because I remember really struggling with this stage and that boss. But most of the bosses are pretty simple, and there's like exploits, as I mentioned, in some of them. So they're super fucking easy if you follow some of my exploits that I'm going to show in the tutorial. And, of course, that has commentary. The last boss is the hardest boss, but it's really just kind of memorizing the basic patterns for a little while. Once you have it down, it's really not too bad. Now, a lot of players I saw would walk with the hands as they move. I figured out you could just, if you time your jump precisely, you can just jump straight up. For me, I found that to simplify it, but you don't have to do it that way. There's pretty much two different ways you can do it. Walk with the hands or jump straight up. But aside from that, I really enjoyed this game. I definitely consider it a classic. And I think I show the full final boss here. But yeah, it's quite a challenging game. It has a good challenge. But I think players will enjoy the tutorial, just to give it a little bit more. Well, one good thing is in the tutorial, I do cover how to do pretty much every checkpoint without any starting power-ups, which, most of these cheated runs online are not legit playthroughs that you see online. Even on the long play channel especially is bad with that, with cheating their runs. So at least you'll see a legit edited playthrough of the game showing, how to play from each checkpoint with no starting power-ups, which if you watch videos of these games online and try to get information about how to beat stages and sections, it's almost impossible to see anything because players are fully powered up. So you got that with the tutorial. But my rating of this game is a 7.5 out of 10, comparing it to other games of this style back in the day. I think it's quite a good game in this style. It's not the best. It's not Ninja Spirit. It's not Donkey Kong Country or some shit, but it's quite a good game. If you have any questions, let me know, and thanks for watching.